My name's Steve and I love people who make things. We're a nation of inventive, inspiring makers.
This room alone will produce 100,000 items a year. But yeah, it used to be full of cows.
And then I'd be, Afghanistan or Iraq, sat in my room just sketching out designs, waiting to come home to play around with them.
I'm on a mission to list the greatest products we make, because if we don't champion the skills on our doorstep, we risk losing them.
And running down to our left, we have hand cutting. The problem is getting labour now.
One of the biggest challenges we have here is our ageing workforce.
Join me as we hear stories from behind the factory doors.
I remember drawing my dad's house and he said, "Why don't you count the bricks?"
Oh, he wanted you to be quiet, didn't he? Do you ever have any sleepless nights, Alex?
I don't sleep.
Together, let's make more makers. Welcome to the Factory Next Door, and welcome to the Malvern Hills in the west of England. We've had a little cold spell, so I'm looking up at snow on the hills. It really is a very pretty sight. We are here for number 25 on our list of the greatest products made in Britain, the Coachbuilt Car. And as I'm talking about cars, a helicopter flies overhead. Malvern is the home of sports car maker Morgan, who make two-seater sports cars with a truly iconic silhouette. Big, bold and beautiful wheel arches. Reminds me of sports cars from 1940s and 50s. As picturesque as it is out here, it's rather cold and a bit windy, so I'm going to head in and say hello. Whilst I do that, have a listen to what's coming up on the show.
When you shut your eyes and think of a Morgan, or even a classic British sports car, you probably think of that Morgan Plus 4 silhouette.
I see a design that has been around for decades. Does that ever feel slightly suffocating?
It is becoming a little harder to get young kids out of college that want to get their hands dirty and learn some of these very traditional art forms.
Oh, I love that smell. Oh, what a great smell. That is the smell of a new car. Why is it called the tin shop?
That's it. That's not a silly question. That's a great question. Truth be told, I've no idea.
Staying where we are is quite a nice place to be. We're kind of the antidote to everything else in a lot of senses.
My name's Jonathan Wells and I'm the Chief Design Officer of Morgan Motor Company.
Okay, Jonathan, tell me what we're looking at here, because I'm blown away by the site.
Okay, well this is the first of a sequence of very old buildings that occupy the Morgan site. We've been here for 112 years in these original buildings. So what Morgan do is coach build vehicles. And coach building is a very traditional manufacturing methodology whereby the coach work, the body, if you like, is totally independent to the chassis. So here is the chassis shop. And in here we have our aluminium bonded and riveted chassis. And on top of each one of those chassis, there is a powertrain being put into the vehicle. Our powertrains come from BMW, and from here onward, down the factory building, we do the body work.
What strikes me first about looking at this very large warehouse where you're assembling these cars is the lack of what I would kind of imagine to be an assembly line.
Absolutely. So at every stage of the build here, you'll see that a Morgan car really is built by hand.
And actually, just as you say that, sorry to interrupt, there's a gentleman literally sat on the floor putting a wheel on one of the cars.
Yeah, so of course we have ramps and things. We also, if you notice in the distance there, we've got these very clever trestles that spin each platform 180 degrees on its center axis. So essentially we can turn the cars upside down very quickly on those trestles, which means that we can do all the clipping points for the brake lines and the wiring underneath. So there's a lot of systems in place to add efficiency and add process, but as you say, there's no robots in sight. Our factory is entirely 100% powered by Weetabix, and you'll see that as we wander through.
Great ad for Weetabix there.
Growing up, I've always been fascinated by machines and vehicles, and particularly two-wheeled vehicles actually. So I was and still am a very keen mountain biker and motorcyclist. I also love to draw, and with grandparents as engineers, a keen interest in engineering as well as an early age. So My parents, who were both teachers, encouraged me to, put together the things that I enjoyed most during a stage of uncertainty about what on earth I was going to do in life, and I discovered that vehicle design was a course I could take. So I studied in Huddersfield for 4 years at university, having taken physics and fine art in high school and my A-levels, and I studied 4 years at university and I got a bachelor in automotive design. Morgan, as I was qualifying and graduating, Morgan had employed its first ever designer. So
hang on, what did they do before a designer?
So in 100 years, this was in 2009. So in 100 years, the centenary year actually, 2009, they'd only just employed their first ever designer. Prior to that, the cars would have been, designed on the factory floor, and you can see that today walking around how inherent the input of the craftsman is in the actual final shape of the car. So, it kind of makes sense. But they didn't have a technically trained professional designer drawing curves, drawing shapes, introducing modern design tools such as surfacing and tension and volume and controlling highlights and thinking about the aesthetic shape and proportion.
I want to go back briefly because I was fascinated by physics and fine art.
Yeah.
Did your teachers think, what on earth?
Yeah, that's it.
They
do
not sit side by side.
No, that's right. And I mean, to be honest, they do in this industry. You need to be a designer. You need to have an eye for what the thing looks like, and you need to take interest in that. But the difference between maybe an artist and a designer is you do have to really understand how it could be manufactured into a product. Of course, an artist has to understand the materials they're using, but a designer needs to understand the materials everyone's using, understand what is possible, understand, everything from metal studies to aerodynamic studies, because that can really influence the body of a car and how it looks in terms of the way it needs to perform aerodynamically. You need to consider ergonomics and the human mechanical interfaces between people and cars, and packaging exercises and acceptable clearances. So it really is broad, and it really is quite scientific, underpinned by this objective to make it look and appeal good.
Underpinned by this goal of making it look good. Do you see yourself as an artist here predominantly, or are you an engineer?
I would often refer to myself as an engineer. Engineer versus artist, I think it's engineer, but I would say designer. And I am an industrial designer. I design products to be manufactured with an industrial process, and it is exactly what it says on the tin, really. So I would refer to myself as an industrial designer.
But you'll see the factory is very open. So right there, we've just walked past a tour of 30 people going around the factory.
A tour of school kids, I think.
Yeah, in that instance, they look like young students. And to be honest, we have 35,000 guests a year on average, sometimes a few more. And you have everything from, coach trips, school kids, customers, dealer visits, car enthusiast groups.
Is that the lunchtime bell?
That's the lunchtime bell we just heard. So the place goes from busy to ghost town in 30 seconds flat. But yeah, so we've just stepped into what would be the tin shop. It's actually quite a good time for lunch, because usually you can't hear yourself thinking in here for all the hammers hammering the metal against the bodies.
Let me ask a really silly question. Why is it called the tin shop?
That's it. That's not a silly question. That's a great question. And truth be told, I've no idea, because we don't use any tin, as it were.
It's all aluminium, isn't it?
It's all aluminium. All aluminium. I guess that's just the traditional sort of terminology for a metalcraft shop that's always hung around for Morgan for some time now. But you're right, everything is aluminium.
And what I love about this room is you've got on the left, again, it's a really long warehouse. On the left, you've got all the cars kind of lined up in different states. I can see the chassis that has come over from next door, but now it's really exciting because you're crafting out of aluminium the really beautiful curves that you start placing on the body that give the Morgan that fabulous, distinctive, iconic look.
Yes, that is absolutely right. So in this shop, we call shops, these workshops, we call them shops for short. In this workshop and the adjacent workshop, we're creating the aluminium bodywork. And that aluminium bodywork is rolled, as you mentioned, through a series of rollers. We use devices called English wheels that can roll curvature and shape into a surface, into a piece of metal by adding more tension on one side opposed to the other side, creates curvature and a dome shape in that form. And we're able to manipulate the aluminium to take on the shape of the wooden frame beneath it.
Can I just jump in there? Because I'm both baffled and amazed by, kind of like the side curves that you've got here that you're making out of aluminium. So I would have just assumed, because I'm very naive, I would have just assumed you literally just kind of punch that.
Yeah, right.
And you just
so
kind
what
of.
we do. That's
But it seems like you do so much more than that, because I've been seeing people literally hammering them.
That's right. So it is a blend. You're absolutely right. So and again, a bit like modern technology and traditional craft, we do use both in unison. So there are parts of these cars that aren't updated as frequently, or where it just makes sense to use a larger tool or a press to rough strike the overall form that we need. And then we can start hand finishing the edges, hand finishing the returns, wiring, adding louvers and dressing those panels. For other parts of the car, they're entirely handcrafted from a flat sheet of aluminium. So there is a blend there of technologies for sure.
To my eye, I see Morgan, and I see what an iconic car. I see a design that has been around for decades. Does that ever feel slightly suffocating when you're being asked to evolve it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So there's a couple of viewpoints you can take and answer it. That the first one is challenging the sort of misconception that nothing changes with Morgan. It is something that a lot of people immediately would jump to, along with a lot of other it does have a wooden chassis and some other sort of stigmas that are largely incorrect. Whether you're designing a toothbrush or a wing mirror or a dial or a sports car, the process is kind of the same. You're sketching, gathering inspiration, you're sketching, you're 3D modelling, you're discussing with fabricators, you're prototyping, you're manufacturing, and everything is a design process. So keeping something the same actually requires a lot of work. Keeping something relevant in terms of technology and powertrain and performance and keeping it updated requires a lot of work. So any sort of suggestion that Morgans don't change is fundamentally incorrect. And, that keeps us very, very busy when we're concerned with what I believe we're talking about here, the +4, the iconic kind of Morgan. When you shut your eyes and think of a Morgan, or even a classic British sports car, you probably think of that Morgan +4 silhouette. And do we feel constrained by that? And the answer is yes. It's sort of the question that kind of underpins everything we do. How do we embrace, adopt, and use modern technology and components that we simply have to use? If you want an automatic gearbox in BMW, they stipulate you having that gear stick in the car. It's a sealed, heavily tested thing that's had millions of pounds on it. To have a contract with BMW, we're using their automatic gear stick. It's great. It's a perfect gear stick. It's the best one to hold. It's lovely. Headlights have to have things like daylight runners. They have to be powerful enough to see down the road with, LED technology and things in them. Engines, you don't really have dipsticks in anymore. It's all on a digital display. You have to be able to read all of these warnings about traction control, ADAS systems, all of these different things on the car that need digital displays. So you're using modern technology and it's going to be visible. How do you do that with a very traditional classic shape without the thing becoming a pastiche, a wedding car, a kind of fake classic? And that's the question we're always asking ourselves. And our approach really is not to try and blend the two. So when you see a Morgan, we don't try and disguise the technology and blend it in, because then I do believe you get a bit of a confused proposition. We actually like to intentionally clash them. And you see that around the factory. You've got this really modern platform, aluminium, bonded, riveted, dual wishbone suspension, traction control. You said yourself 1,000 wires and systems on this thing. And then you've got a wooden frame sat on top of it. And I love that clash. It's almost, we call it like the clash culture. It's literally celebrating the tradition for everything it is in perfect honesty, celebrating the modern for everything it is in perfect honesty.
It's very visually arresting when you see the two materials. Right. That kind of representation.
That contrast, yeah. And that's kind of our approach to it, rather than sort of blending and trying to hide and being a bit disingenuous. But It's a real challenge.
Desire for Morgan is to keep as much manufacturing skill in-house. As soon as you start buying in big commodities, you find yourself committing to larger volumes to get a minimum order quantity down, and you inherently end up with less flexibility in production. The beautiful thing about coach building is we take a chassis, and in fact that chassis you saw is only really turned into the particular car it's going to be when the engine is put in. That qualifies whether it's a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder. We then choose where the steering wheel sits, left or right-hand drive, and then we choose which body we put on top of it. So actually, when we're buying the basic components for that first chassis, we still have a lot of flexibility to build what we want. So we can build cars to satisfy demand of particular models, and we don't have to produce lots and lots of cars and perhaps, find ourselves with stock and things like that, because every Morgan is built to order. It is becoming a little harder to get young kids out of college that want to get their hands dirty and learn some of these very traditional art forms, and we have a lot of very experienced craftsmen that have been here a long time. So we do need to keep replenishing that skill. As such, we have an active apprenticeship program, and the majority of them will decide to continue their career with us after their educational piece is finished. And that's the best way to keep the skills coming through the business for us.
I don't want you to make me cry, but actually throughout this show, a common theme, unfortunately, has been the sense of kind of enticing people in
Yes.
to learn the skills. Now, when I was driving here this morning, I thought, I'm not going to touch that subject because of all the amazing kind of companies or industries, a beautiful sports car maker probably doesn't have an issue around enticing and attracting new recruits to come in and learn the skills. And we've just passed a school group full of like 35 kids who were super excited, I could tell, about seeing these things. You're telling me no, that still is an issue?
No, the challenge really is enticing people with these very specific skill sets. So to get to the point where you are a master craftsman and you can panel beat an entire body into, from sheet metal into resembling a beautiful sports car, there is a lot of skills there. That journey is not a quick one. So the time it takes to skill somebody and train somebody to that stage, and having the person with the appetite to become that level of craftsman, that is something we have to take very, very seriously.
What shop is this called?
So this is essentially an extension of the sheet metal or the tin shop.
From the little bit of wood that we saw in the previous room, when we've come through to this room, you've got these wooden kind of structures that I describe them as kind of the cockpit part of the car that drops on all of the chassis. And it looks beautiful, doesn't it? It really does.
As a designer, I love the textures of Morgan. You stand anywhere and just to look at what you're seeing, you see the cold silver aluminium in the chassis, you've got the very warm, beautiful ash hardwood on top of the cars.
Do you know what I don't see? I don't see any plastic.
No, we don't really use any plastic. There's inherently bits and pieces, especially the engine and stuff, but very, very, very little plastic. Wood, aluminium and leather are our ingredients. And whilst we do deviate, we use fabrics and non-leathers and different materials here, there, and lots of different woods as well in terms of the interior trim. But yeah, predominantly wood, aluminium and leather. So we literally are hammering the aluminium onto this wooden shape. The wood receives that vibration, that energy very well indeed. And if we need to change something to maybe tweak a shut line or to get a panel to align a bit better, we can take a little bit off the wood and the aluminium takes on the shape there afterward. So it really becomes the tool, the mechanism in which we hand make these bodies. The wood is a natural absorber of vibration, and it's very good at tackling something automotive engineers consider called NVH, noise, vibration and harshness. The general comfort and feel of all those components in that assembly, moving and touching against each other with their subtle tolerances. Wood is a very good insulator of those vibrations, so it's fantastic material to have within a body structure. And of course, this is way before the point we've even talked about sustainability benefits to that.
Do you know what? Metal, wood, leather. That's what I need. Yeah. I don't need all of this plastic that is kind of being pumped out.
There's an honesty to this, Everything in Morgan communicates a very simple, honest purpose. If it looks like metal, it's metal. If it looks like wood, it's wood.
How do you stay relevant with a car that looks very traditional?
Yeah.
But obviously it's evolving. But how are you winning new customers and keeping up to date and having that aspirational brand in it, kind of in
Yeah.
the sports car market, which I imagine
Yeah.
is exceedingly fierce.
Yeah, we have lots of levers we can pull. There's trains of thought that say, don't change too much. In a field of, lots of 50 to 70,000 pound premium sports cars, a lot are heavily informed by maximum aerodynamic performance and packaging, and made with similar materials. And there's a lot of cars that are quite similar to one another, broadly speaking. And then you've got a car that's just as fast, if not faster, in a straight line. Maybe not as quick around a corner, but a load more fun trying because you're sat so far back with that long bonnet. It's been made entirely by hand for you with a handshake from the guy building it. And it looks so unlike anything else. And when our car arrives, people will smile at you at a junction, they'll wave at you as you come past. It's not aggressive. And compare that against everything else. Actually, staying where we are is quite a nice place to be. We're kind of the antidote to everything else in a lot of senses. And that's really important for our customers, whatever their taste profile. There's other levers we pull in terms of, maybe we focus on performance with certain models, and maybe we do focus on a bit more of the exclusivity or tailoring. Every Morgan's very exclusive, they're all built to order, but we might do an even more exclusive range of just 50 cars and maybe target certain collector markets and collector interests. That can be a lever we can pull. In terms of broad brush design, we talked a little bit today walking around the factory about sustainability, and there's a longevity of ownership model, which is very good for the planet. Morgans are kept forever. But they won't be kept forever if they go out of date very quickly. So designing a car of today with today's design trends might not look so fresh in 5 or 6 years' time, and are less likely to perhaps be kept forever. So there's a responsibility toward timeless design that we kind of treasure a little bit. And if we said today our customers are, between their 40s and 50s perhaps, on the whole, there's a lot younger, but on the whole, and they maybe could really resonate with a car like a Morgan Plus 4 because perhaps their grandfather or their father had one, or they grew up around them, in the sort of heyday of the British sports car industry, and they get a lot of nostalgic confidence and joy from that car. As the next generation of buyer comes on, it won't be those cars from that era, it'll be the ones from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And you see this in the classic car world in terms of what becomes more valuable. Pre-war stuff's got very cheap all of a sudden now because there's less people around that relate to it. So I don't think Morgan needs to go from 1940 to 2050 in terms of its design language. I think maybe we can start looking a bit more into the 50s and 60s and 70s, where cars became a bit more full-bodied, and you got beautiful cars like your E-Types and your early 911s, and there's some really interesting stuff there, which could be quite a natural evolution for Morgan, and we'd still be building a traditionally inspired British sports car. So that interests us.
Dear Factory Next Door community, my name's Lou and my dad is Steve, host of this podcast. When he's not telling me bad jokes, he's recording this show. He's got no team behind him, no agency funding it. He pays for everything. If you can afford to, would you please buy him a coffee so he can keep this show on the road? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Factory Next Door. I'll also put the web address in the About section of the show and on his Instagram page. Thank you for helping to keep my dad busy and out of my hair when I'm trying to play Minecraft. I'll let you return to the show now.
What I love about working at Morgan is that very holistic, collaborative approach. And it sounds a bit waffy, but as soon as we've got the bones of a sketch, I'll be having conversations with Dave in the wood shop or Marcin in the tin shop, and straight away the craftsmanship and the capabilities of the materials and of the processes are directly influencing what you draw.
It sounds like there's an immediacy to new ideas that actually you can riff on. You can literally just kind of come out and say, Claire, make me that.
Exactly that. Which I really love. We've just done a big project with another design house called Pininfarina, Italian design firm.
I know them.
It's the first time we've done an exterior form design collaboration. We work with a lot of major, European names, BMW and Continental, etc. But it's the first time we've collaborated with design on exterior form. And Pininfarina don't manufacture cars per se; they're a design house. And so our designers were over there with them. using incredible design facilities and 3D mixed reality augmented headsets and these incredible power walls, and these are awesome design facilities, lots of digital resource, and it was really eye-opening for me and my team. And then the week afterward, their designers would come over here and they'd find themselves not sat in a similar looking studio to their own, but here in these, red brick buildings, chatting with some of these guys in tin and wood, and you could just see their inspirations broadening beyond what they've seen on Pinterest in their own imagination into, wow, actually we can do this with wood and maybe we can make a shape like this, and you could see them enjoying a little bit of what we enjoy every day. And I like to think we gave them as much as they gave us in that sense.
I'm sure you did.
And that really is, it's the immediacy of that which is the exciting bit. You don't just live in a digital conceptual 2D realm. You're working, hands-on, real life with real people. So,
out into the bright sunshine. I love Malvern Hills there with the snow on.
Pretty special, actually. I don't see that very often. So yeah, there's the Malvern Hills, and we're stood right now in the middle of the yard. So to our right, we've got all the factory buildings running down the hill, and in front of us, we have the Malvern Hills up in the distance. There was a story of a famous industrialist called Sir Harvey Jones visiting, and he gave a lot of feedback about how Morgan perhaps should do things differently, and the exchanges he had with the Morgan family were very entertaining. And famously, they kind of rebuked a lot of it. They didn't engage and didn't take the advice. When the cameras were turned off, they said, you know what, he did have one good idea. Let's start the cars at the top of the hill and roll them down using gravity rather than pushing them up. So that is one piece of advice the Morgans did take. And now we start the cars at the top and we use gravity to roll them down.
Into another building labelled Trim. Oh, I love that smell. Oh, what a great smell. That is the smell of a new car.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly the smell of a new car. So,
I see cars kind of which I could jump in and race off in.
That's right. We've gone from metal sculptures to actual cars by the time we get to this point. So in here we're doing all of the upholstery and the final furnishings.
What's this gentleman doing here with what looks like a hairdryer?
So Chris there has got a heat gun, and what he's actually doing is a hide of leather has been wrapped around the dash roll, and obviously if you sort of was take a piece of paper and wrap it around a football, you're going to get creases and things. Leather is much more pliable, but sometimes it needs a little bit of heat applied just to have it rest and lose all the creases, the wrinkles, and just, it's almost like ironing it with air, if you like, just getting it to take on the form of the part beneath it.
I like that, ironing it with air. Brilliant. How much does sustainability come into your thinking? Maybe more now, or maybe not.
But because Morgan is so inherently sustainable, it hasn't been this massive journey to really seek to find ways to really, improve sustainability. The cars are made, as you've seen, entirely by hand, so we don't have a massive industrious manufacturing facility here consuming a lot of energy. It's made, people power. The woods, the aluminiums, the leather, we're all using very organic, natural materials. But moreover, in over 115 years, 90% of all Morgans are still accounted for, which means we're not putting cars back into.
Hang on. I want to. That's an extraordinary stat. Yeah. So in 115 years of making cars, 90%
still accounted
of your cars, you still know where they are.
They still know where they are, or we know their whereabouts, or they've not been put back to ground. So
that is phenomenal.
When you think about that, and then you compare that to a 2-ton electric vehicle with an average lifespan of about 10 years and, sourcing and originating the lithium and all the things that come into manufacturing a car like that, the Morgan's overall impact on the world is very, very low.
I want to touch on the love of Morgan because, I'm fascinated by how open this factory is. And how many cars a year do you sell?
It can vary depending on new markets and the models we're building, whether they take longer or shorter, but roughly 700.
So 700 cars, 35,000 people come through your factory tour every year.
Every year, yeah. At least, on average, yeah.
Hang on. So people are flocking to Morgan not to buy a car. Because for whatever reason,
great point.
They can't afford
Great
it.
point, yeah. I mean, I wish that we were all buying cars. That'd be amazing, though.
But
But they're doing it. Are they doing it because they love Morgan?
Great, yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question, and I'm sure there's guys in the marketing team that know the answer because they ask that question a lot more, maybe better than I do. My father's not a car guy, but he's been on factory tours here, many, many, many times with his friends. They have such an amazing time, and even if they're not car people, you're not looking at cars, you're looking at craftsmen working with wood and guys hammering metal into shape. When do you ever see a guy hammering a sheet of metal into something sculptural? It's a cool thing to see. And when it's happening with 10, 20 people in a room, and then the next room they're shaping beautiful wood, you've got all the smells, it's a very, it's a big charge on the senses and the textures and the visuals. It's quite an exciting place to be.
I have no doubt. Many, many years of exciting times ahead. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, so we head into our shed of greatness, and number 25 on our list of the greatest products we make here, the Coachbuilt Car by Morgan. My thanks to Jonathan and the whole team at Morgan for showing us around. Hugely appreciated as ever. Our next episode comes out on Christmas Eve, and it's a festive one. We're going to a vineyard making some of the very finest sparkling wines. Do say hello on Instagram at The Factory Next Door, or email steve@thefactorynextdoor.com. Hello to Paul Jacobs, who emailed to say he only ever wears Black Horse Lane jeans and also happened to reveal his company in Sheffield makes scissors. Might have to come and say hello to you. Rebecca Thompson, thanks for the tip-off. Stephen Halfpenny, great suggestions. I am on it. Shout out to Steve Crook, who brought to my attention the amazing sheds his brother Ian is building. Ian quit his job in IT to pursue his passion. Inspiring stuff. Ian from UHUT, I doff my cap to you. And by the way, your brother loves you. And thanks to Podcast Rex, who recently reviewed The Factory Next Door, describing it as a gem of a show. On behalf of the Factory Next Door community, thanks. Okay, time to say goodbye for now. I hope you'll join me on Christmas Eve for some wine. Until then, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you're happy. Bye.